Robin Williams used to grope his Mork and Mindy co-star Pam Dawber as his madcap sense of humor crossed the line into sexual harassment, a new book reveals. In the upcoming biography of the comedian, Robin, by New York Times journalist Dave Itzkoff, Dawber, 66, tells how the actor repeatedly grabbed her bottom and breasts and took off his clothes in front of her during the 4-year run of the show. Williams would also wrestle her down and break wind on her, and once goosed an elderly actress playing her grandmother by putting a cane between her buttocks, she disclosed. But the actress, who played Mindy alongside Williams' Mork, admits that she never took offense because the comedian was so charming. She described filming the show as so much fun and remarked, "It was the 70s, after all." The show's director Howard-Storm also contended that there was nothing lascivious about it. In his mind, it was just Robin being Robin. However, the revelations about Williams, one of the most adored comics of all time, could cause consternation for some of his fans and those of the show, which ran from 1978 to 1982. Dawber's unfazed reaction may surprise some too, as it comes amid the Me Too movement, when victims of sexual harassment are encouraged to speak out. Itzkoff interviewed Dawber for the books set to be released in May and published by Henry Holt. It is the most thorough account of the comic's life since he hanged himself in 2014 after being diagnosed with Parkinson's. The autopsy on his body revealed he also had Lewy bodies, a nerve condition which causes dementia. The TV sitcom made a star of Williams and kicked off his Hollywood career that would include films like Mrs. Doubtfire and Dead Poets Society, which made him one of the most famous comics on the planet. In the show, a spin-off of the television hit Happy Days, he played an alien who comes to Earth from the planet Orc and moves in with a roommate, Mindy. Dawber, who played a human who would eventually become Mork's wife, gave Williams a springboard for his wild, offbeat humor. Speaking to Itzkoff, Dawber said Williams was such a nice person and had a gigantic heart, adding that they became close and she became the big sister that he never had. "I really loved Robin and Robin really loved me. We just clicked," she said. But on the set, Williams did things that went beyond those which a brother and sister would do to each other, ranging from crass behavior to sitting and farting on Dawber despite her protestations. Williams, however, also caused tensions on set with his constant improvisations, which led some to think there was no script, a myth he perpetuated. Itzkoff writes that many of these additions were sexual and directed at the women in the cast, such as when he goosed the actress who played Mindy's grandmother with a cane. Storm said, "I'm standing there watching this and I'm thinking, oh my god, and I just laughed. I thought she was going to turn and say, how dare you stick a cane in a woman's a, that sweet old lady." There was nothing lascivious about it. In his mind.It was just Robin being Robin, and he thought it would be funny. He could get away with murder. Other times Williams would grab Dawber's bottom or her breasts simply because he was bored. He'd be doing a paragraph, and in the middle of it, he would just turn and grab her A. Or grab a breast.and we'd start again. I'd say, "Robin, there's nothing in the script that says you grab Pam's A." And he'd say, "Oh, okay, Storm added. Gary Marshall, the producer of the show, said he would take all his clothes off, he would be standing there totally naked, and she was trying to act." His aim in life was to make Pam Dawber blush. But Dawber remained unfazed. She admits, "I had the grossest things done to me by him." "And I never took offense. I mean, I was flashed, humped, bumped, grabbed. I think he probably did it to a lot of people. But it was so much fun. Somehow he had that magic. If you put it on paper you would be appalled." But somehow he had this guileless little thing that he would do those sparkly eyes. He'd look at you, really playful, like a puppy, all of a sudden. And then he'd grab your TTS and then run away. And somehow he could get away with it. It was the 70s, after all. Mork and Mindy changed Williams' life incalculably, and by the time it finished in 1982 he had gone from never having had a gig that lasted more than 3 weeks to a national star. But his success came with a cost, as his marriage to his first wife Valerie Velarde, whom he married in 1978, became strained due to his constant work and cocaine-fueled partying with the comedy crowd. In fact, fellow comics would say Robin loved cocaine. During one of his performances at the Comedy Store, Valerie was in the audience when he said, "There's girls that come up to me and they're like, 'Excuse me, would you?' and pointed towards his crotch." Valerie shouted out, "Oh, you love it," to which Williams responded, "Oh, now my wife's heckling me." Itzkoff writes that Valerie had no illusions about her husband's drinking, drug use, and infidelity, but had to allow him these indulgences in the hope that his waywardness was providing him with something that he needed as an artist and performer. They would remain together until 1988, by which time they had a son, Zach. Williams' drug use escalated further, but the death of fellow comedian John Belushi from an overdose in 1982 caused him to sober up. He would remain clean for 2 decades. After a few false starts, Williams' movie career took off with Good Morning Vietnam in 1987, in which he played renegade DJ on a military radio station in Saigon during the Vietnam War. His improvisational style for the rapid-fire scenes made the film a massive hit. In 1989, the year after Williams divorced Valerie, he married Marcia Garces, Zach's nanny, who took a far more active role in his life by managing his schedule and acting as his gatekeeper. Their marriage was the most stable and most successful period of Williams' life and resulted in classic hit films such as Good Will Hunting, which earned him the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. There were also beloved children's movies such as Jumanji, Flubber, Hook, and the voice of the genie in Disney's Aladdin. Williams and Marcia had 2 children, Zelda and Cody, and in one interview he had said that thanks to his wife he found peace and stopped running around with all this madness. Marcia dismissed the idea she was his savior and said, "He needed stability. I'm Robin's safety net." "He knows I'm strong." Born on July 21, 1951, Williams grew up between Michigan and Illinois as his father moved around and climbed the corporate ladder at the Ford Motor Company, which made it hard for him to make friends. Instead, he lived in his imagination. For a time the family lived in the Stonycroft mansion in Detroit, where he would spend hours in his attic playing with his vast collection of toys and creating characters in his head, acting them out in his own private fantasy land. Itzkoff writes that Williams would in a sense never leave the attic and would spend his entire life surrounded by fictional friends. Williams attended Claremont Men's College in Los Angeles, where he planned to become a Foreign Service officer, but took a theater elective class, and after that he was hooked. He moved to New York, where he studied at Juilliard, where he met Christopher Reeve, the Superman actor who became a lifelong friend, but he did not finish the course. Williams relocated to Los Angeles and began performing at the Comedy Store, where future stars like David Letterman had checked him out. Williams met comic legend Richard Pryor, his comedy mentor, and became friends with him. It was here that Williams began an enduring pattern of behavior, staying up late until sunrise doing drugs and drinking with other comics that would haunt him his whole life. Marcia, his second wife, helped to keep him straight until the 2000s, when he suffered a series of personal losses. Reeve died in October 2004 to a pressure wound caused by being bound to a wheelchair as a result of a horse riding accident 9 years earlier. Pryor died the following year and Williams began drinking again for the first time in 20 years and thought about committing suicide. After a family intervention in 2006, he detoxed at the Hazelden Foundation Center in Newberg, Oregon, followed by months of Alcoholics Anonymous, but his relationship with Marcia was never the same since he had kept his drinking secret from her. Itzkoff describes it as a catastrophic breach of faith by the person she was supposed to be able to trust completely. The revelation of his relapse poisoned their marriage and caused her to question everything she knew and took for granted about him, Itzkoff writes. As Zach puts it, he had been married most of his adult life. When fame hit, it hit really hard. It was non-stop from 27 years onward. It was just a ride. It's only when things slowed down a bit that he could assess the situation. At the end of 2007, Williams and Marcia split up. His film career was failing, and that year his half-brother Todd, a figure he thought of as immortal, died of heart failure at 44. After divorcing Marcia, Williams moved to Tiburon near San Francisco, where his father had moved his family when he was a teenager, seeking privacy and comfort. His house had a bunker with no windows in which he kept collections of soldiers from every war he could find. There were lead ones, Japanese ones, German ones, soldiers from the Boer War, a colonial British conflict in South Africa at the turn of the century, and lots of Star Wars memorabilia. I think they were his friends. His friend Lisa Birnbach said. Williams occasionally did stand-up comedy, and, with 2 ex-wives and alimony to pay, he embarked on a tour called Weapons of Self-Destruction in late 2008. But in early 2009, when he reached Florida, he developed a nagging cough and started feeling dizzy. He was examined by a doctor who told him he had an irregular heartbeat and damaged heart valves, which he decided to have replaced. Just before the operation at the Cleveland Clinic, his family were introduced to his new girlfriend, Susan Schneider, a 44-year-old artist and graphic designer who had been on tour with him. He told his family they had first met in October 2007 at an Apple store and had been quietly dating while Williams' divorce from Marcia was still ongoing. But Zach felt differently and thought that the two actually met at an AA meeting. Susan was a recovering alcoholic who had been sober for 23 years. Itzkoff writes, amid the anxiety and uncertainty of whether Robin would even survive the surgery or his recovery from it, his children were concerned that Susan was monopolizing their father. In a particularly awkward moment, Robin's surgeons offered his family a pager to hold on to during the procedure, which could be used to summon them at a moment's notice if any problems occurred. While Zach and Cody hesitated, each expecting the other to take the pager, they were startled when Susan claimed it for herself. Zach said that Susan explicitly expressed a disinterest in getting to know them as people and that they were hurt by her conduct. In 2011, Williams and Susan married at a ceremony in Napa Valley, but it was a fraught affair for his 3 children, according to Itzkoff, because they felt loyal to Marcia and were not sure if they should even be there. While some of Williams' friends thought that Susan gave him companionship he sorely needed, others noted that she did not manage his affairs like Marcia did. She did not always go with him when he worked out of town and had a life on her own, traveling widely by herself and spending time with her 2 sons from a previous marriage. From 2013 onward, Williams' health got worse, and he began to have stomach cramps, tremors in his left arm, and he walked with a stoop at times. His anxiety and nervousness took over his life. A year later, he was diagnosed with degenerative Parkinson's disease, which attacks the central nervous system and eventually leads to death. Williams' children decided to spend as much time with him as possible, but that meant getting around Susan, his assistant Rebecca, and his managers. This resistance discouraged them from seeking him out. Zach worried that his father was isolated and became concerned when he told him Susan was making him hang out with her friends who he was deeply suspicious of. They feel like users, he told his son.I in June. Williams checked himself into rehab again in his stay at the Dan Anderson Renewal Center in Minnesota would keep him where he could manage his illnesses, Susan thought. But other friends saw it differently, Itzkoff writes, and that Williams had no reason to stay at a rehab clinic when he was suffering from a physical disorder. Close friend Wendy Asher said, "That was wrong. This was a medical problem. Susan thought everything could be fixed through AA, and it just wasn't true." Weeks later, Williams banged his head on the bathroom door, causing it to bleed heavily. Susan later said the injury led him to enter trance-like states and become frozen. Friends said that he had a 1,000-yard stare and did not recognize him. On August 9, Williams visited Zach and Alex, who half-jokingly asked him to stay with them. Zach said, "We didn't want someone who seemed to be in so much anguish to leave. We wanted him to stay with us." "We wanted to take care of him." The next day, Williams was at home with Susan when he began to fixate on some of his designer wristwatches and became paranoid they were in danger of being stolen. He stuffed some of them in a sock and around 7 p.m. drove to his friends Rebecca and Dan Spencer nearby and gave the watches for safekeeping. He said "Good night, my love," as he always did to Susan, and offered her a foot massage, which she declined. He rummaged through the bedroom closet and left with an iPad, which Susan saw as a good sign because she thought he was reading. He left her bedroom at 10:30 p.m. and headed to the separate bedroom he slept in. At 11. 42 a.m. the next day, his assistant, Rebecca, used a paper clip to force open the door and made the horrific discovery: Williams had hanged himself with a belt. Susan later revealed that she said goodbye to her husband that afternoon and told him, "I'm not mad at you, I don't blame you at all. You fought so hard, and you were so brave." The autopsy report from the Marin County coroner confirmed that Williams had Lewy bodies, which Williams did not know about during his lifetime. More surprises were to follow with regards to Susan. A month before he married Susan in 2011, Williams had entered into a prenuptial agreement with her which said he planned to leave his $100 million estate in a trust which was operated by his attorneys. He also created a separate trust for Susan worth $7 million and their Tiburon home, its contents, and enough cash to cover her day-to-day expenditure. Williams, however, said that specific items like his memorabilia and personal items should go to his 3 children. An ugly dispute began between Susan and Williams' children, which ended up in court. Susan accused the Williams children of taking things they were not entitled to while they accused her of refusing to give them their father's belongings. Both sides eventually came to an agreement under which Williams' children would get thousands of items like his Oscar statue, 50 bikes, and 85 watches. Susan received enough money to remain in the home they had shared for the rest of her life. Itzkoff writes that the whole dispute reinforced a long-standing discomfort they had felt about Susan and whether she fully shared the values of her husband and his family. Cheery Mins, Williams' makeup artist, said, "I think she just wanted to secure her place as Mrs. Williams, the final Mrs. Williams. And to always be that. I can't see that. And none of it really matters. Because he's gone." Zach said, "Susan was under the impression she had struck gold. But for us, we're deeply involved with Dad's life. You can't untether us from the equation." Dave Itzkoff's Robin will be released on May 15, 2018 and is available for pre-order on Amazon.